Good morning. Welcome to Girls in the 603. I'm Tana Clues, CEO of the New Hampshire Women's Foundation. We are so happy that you're joining us this morning for the release of our inaugural Status of Girls in New Hampshire report. This is the most comprehensive report on girls in New Hampshire and includes 33 indicators in the areas of education, economic security, health, substance abuse, and safety. This will be a biennial report released every other year, and in the off years, we will continue to release our flagship publication, The Status of Women. This report was made possible thanks to our friends at Jane's Trust and through the hard work of several of my colleagues, including Research Fellow Dow Drukker and our Director of Policy, Devan Quinn, as well as the wonderful work of our longtime research partner, Dr. Kristin Smith, formerly of the Carsey School and now at Dartmouth College. I'd like to turn things over now to our Director of Policy, Devan Quinn.
Thanks, Tana. I'm Devan Quinn. I'm the new Director of Policy at the New Hampshire Women's Foundation. I'm so excited to join you today. I joined 6 weeks ago, and now we're putting out the Status of Girls in New Hampshire. And the status of girls and the work that goes into it takes a village. And I've been here for 6 weeks and seen how much work has gone into this, particularly a huge shout out to Dow, who you're going to hear from, who is the expert on this data, along with our panelist, Kristin Smith. And the importance of this research is so important to so much of our work in research, but also advocacy, policy making, communicating with the state, our grant making. It is so important for our work to be data informed. And we also want to offer this data out to the world, to New Hampshire organizations, to policymakers, so that they can make informed decisions about girls in our state. So this is our agenda for this hour we have together. You just heard from Tana. I'm going to tell you a quick few other tidbits about the report. And then Dow, our research fellow, is going to present to you the Status of Girls report. This data is comprehensive and compelling, and Dow is only going to give you some highlights, and it is full of information that you might want to go back to. And we are very excited to share this data with you, and if you want to talk further after this presentation about specific data, we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback and how you might use this data, which will help us make future versions of this report. Then we're going to head over to our panelist discussion with a phenomenal group of panelists who are experts and have wonderful lived experiences. And after that, we'll take audience questions. So we have about 10 or 15 minutes at the end for audience questions. So we would love for you to be putting in your questions. At the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. And if you click that, you can enter your questions during any part of this program, and we'll get to those at the end. If you want to go to the next slide down. Just a couple, so here's the, on the right, this is the cover of the Status of Girls in New Hampshire 2021. We are so excited to present it to you. This report is now available online as of right now. So Crystal is gonna pop that in the chat so that you can have that PDF. That'll be available on our website, so you can go to it at any time. It's open and available to the public. There will be physical copies available if that's what you'd prefer to have it in hand. And we'll also be available for presentations to your organization if you want to get deeper into this data or have a presentation to specifically a group that you think might benefit from seeing this report and having that discussion. So that's just some housekeeping about today. And now I'm going to turn it over to the main event for Dow to tell you all about the data in this wonderful, amazing, comprehensive report. Go ahead, Dow.
Great. Thank you, Devan, and thank you all for joining us this morning for the official release of the 2021 Status of Girls report. My name is Dow Drukker, and I'm the Research Fellow for the New Hampshire Women's Foundation. Before we move forward with the presentation of the report, I want to take a few minutes to discuss some notes on the data used throughout. First and foremost, we recognize that this report is being released in the midst of a pandemic, as obviously we are all meeting via Zoom, and we are aware of the significant impact that the pandemic has had on New Hampshire girls. However, the data in this report is from the most recent available date prior to publication, most of which is before the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic. Consequently, this report does not capture the effects of COVID-19 on New Hampshire girls. However, this data will provide a valuable baseline for comparison and future publications. Additionally, the data used in this report was collected from various state and federal databases, and as such, reporting is limited to the data collected by those respective sources. And while the New Hampshire Women's Foundation recognizes and values gender expansive identities and inclusive and self-determining race and ethnic identities, we are often unable to report more inclusive data due to insufficient data collection practices at the state and national level. The New Hampshire Women's Foundation will continue to support and advocate for policies and expansions in data collection practices that provide a more inclusive and understanding of the experience of women and girls in our state. Included in the report is 6 sections. We look at demographics, education, economic security, health, substance use, and safety. Within each of these 6 sections comprise 33 data indicators that we compiled. We also feature 5 program organization spotlights that correspond with 5 of the 6 sections that we will discuss towards the end of the presentation. However, as Devan previously mentioned, I will only be primarily discussing the data we found most relevant due to time constraints. Throughout the report, there are some key takeaways that I plan to outline through the select data discussed in the presentation. First, while there are areas of concern, of course, there is still plenty of areas worth celebrating that show girls in New Hampshire excel through continued perseverance and resilience. Second, the population of New Hampshire girls you will find is increasingly diversifying and evolving. Third, compared to boys, girls face greater challenges in most areas featured in the report. Fourth, disparities persist by race, ethnicity, and geographic location of girls throughout our state. And lastly, girls have endless potential for growth through community investment and supportive programs that foster empowerment. We can now begin our tour of the Status of Girls report with our first section and first page of the report, our demographics. Within our demographics section, we look at the areas of race, ethnicity, population distribution, family structure, and sexual orientation. There are 125,000 girls in New Hampshire, or 9% of the total state population. Although in recent years, New Hampshire's population of girls has been steadily decreasing. However, while New Hampshire girls have been decreasing in overall population, they have been increasingly diversifying, and we can see that here in the percent change of race and ethnicity for girls. From 2006 to 2019, the population of girls of color in the state has increased by 61%. Specifically, girls who identify as multiracial has increased by 164%, Hispanic and Latina girls by 63%, and Black and African American girls by 60%. While it's important to celebrate this increasing diversification, we also want to note that there's the population of girls of color in our state still only comprises 17% of the total population of girls. Our next section we look at is education, where we look at areas of academic performance, family interests in girls' schooling, post-graduation aspirations, and career and technical program enrollment. A couple of areas we want to highlight that we found most interesting is the disconnect between girls' strong subject proficiency grades in math and science, but low enrollment in technical and career development programs in the STEM area. I'd like to draw your attention to the graphic on the left first. Subject proficiency rates consist of the average testing outcomes for select girls during their K through 12 academic careers, which show that despite girls' historically low testing performances in math and science, New Hampshire girls are on par with boys in these subjects. And in the area of language arts, have considerably higher testing scores than boys. Now looking at the graphic on the right, which shows that the career technical education enrollment by gender for select courses, we find that despite girls' strong performance and subject proficiency for testing, subject proficiency testing for math and science, the enrollment in STEM-related career and technical education courses are still overwhelmingly male-dominated. For example, in the program shown in the box to the left of information technology and science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, girls comprise only 12.4% and 28.2%. Whereas girls make up the majority of enrollment in historically female-dominated programs shown to the right of education and human services. This is important as research finds that as girls enter secondary and post-secondary education, they are systematically tracked away from STEM fields. Achieving gender parity in all career technical education programs is essential in providing equal opportunities for girls' futures in our state. Our next section you can see here is the economic security page, where we look at poverty and labor force participation. I'd like to highlight the poverty rates by county. An area of celebration is New Hampshire as one of the lowest poverty rates for girls in the nation at just 8%. While this is significant, it's important to recognize that there is considerable variation by county. Girls living in the most rural counties of our state have significantly higher poverty rates than girls in the least rural areas of our state. For example, Sullivan and Carroll counties, the poverty rate for girls is 18 and 15%, which is significantly higher than the poverty rates for girls in Rockingham and Merrimack, which are just 5 and 6%. Our next section is the section of health, which is one of our largest sections, and we look at 3 sub-themes: physical health, mental health, and sexual health. In our health section, we find that girls face greater adversities in most areas, particularly girls of color and girls in rural regions of the state. This is especially evident in the area of mental health. Here we can see considered attempted suicide rates and depression rates by gender in the state. And girls have considerably higher rates of in both these areas than boys. 44% of girls felt depressed, whereas only 24% of boys. Conversely, 23% of girls had seriously considered attempting suicide, whereas only 14% of boys. Furthermore, as we examine these 2 areas of mental health by race and ethnicity within girls, we find disparities exist. Girls of color, particularly Black and African American, Hispanic, Latina, and multiracial girls, have higher rates than their peers in both areas. Hispanic Latina girls, 52% of Hispanic Latina girls felt depressed, and 31% of Hispanic Latina girls had seriously considered suicide. Moving on to sexual health, where we look at teen birth rates, contraceptive use, and STD rates. An area I want to highlight of a particular concern is the correlation we found between contraceptive use and STD chlamydia rates. First off, it's worth noting that there has been an increase in select contraceptive use for teens. In the top graph, we can see that in birth control use and IUDs and implants, which is a big win for girls in recent years. However, while there has been an increase in these select contraceptive uses, there has been a decrease from 64% to 55% in condom use, which protects against the spread of STDs such as chlamydia, which disproportionately affect girls. Consequently, in the bottom graph, which looks at chlamydia rates, we can see that from 2014 to 2019, there was a 43% increase in prevalence of chlamydia amongst girls. We now look at substance use, where we analyze the variety of substances, such as e-cigarette use, marijuana, alcohol, and prescription drug use. Although I'd like to highlight the shockingly high e-cigarette and vaping use by girls by race and ethnicity. Here we can see the rate for vaping and e-cigarette use in girls by race and ethnicity. And I want to note the especially high rates for Hispanic Latina girls at 45% compared to their peers. This prevalence poses serious negative implications for girls' health and is significant considering the increasing use of these products in recent years. Our final data section is the area of safety, where we look at bullying and harassment and sexual and dating violence. I'd like to discuss two areas that we want to highlight. First, our bullying rates by gender for New Hampshire youth. We can see here that girls have considerably larger experiences of having been bullied than boys. 28% of girls had experienced any form of bullying, whereas only 19% of boys had. Additionally, 27% of girls had experienced electronic bullying, where only 13% of boys had. Secondly, I'd like to discuss sexual violence against girls by race and ethnicity, where we can see here that Hispanic Latina girls, 25% had experienced any form of sexual violence. 19% of multiracial girls had experienced any sexual violence, and 17% of white girls. Now, I want to take a couple minutes to discuss our program and organization spotlights. Throughout the report, we include spotlights on the following organizations and programs doing work across the state to support, engage, and empower New Hampshire girls. The programs listed are Girls at Work, Circle Program, Girls on the Run, Girls Inc., and Arts and Reach. We wanted to include a qualitative component to a report by featuring the voices and lived experiences of girls in our state. So you'll find that these program spotlight sections include quotes from girls and participants in these organizations who discuss their experiences. For example, you can see to our right in the Girls Inc. spotlight, an excellent quote from Jaihliani, one of our panelists, who you will hear from shortly. It's important to connect the data in this report with the work these programs are doing in their community to uplift and empower girls despite facing challenges and adversity. We encourage you all to look more into these organizations and all the great work they do. Lastly, I'd like to recap some of our main takeaways. We found that while there are certainly areas of concern that need to be addressed for girls, there are also areas that show perseverance and strength. This can be seen in girls' strong academic performance in math and science, overall low state poverty rates, an increase in contraceptive use for birth control, and IUD and implants. We also saw that over the past 10 years, we've seen an increase in racial diversity amongst our girls. Although, conversely, while there are areas we're celebrating, of course, there are areas where we need to spend more attention on. Disparities persist between girls and boys in the areas of low STEM enrollment and CTE courses, girls' higher rates of poor mental health, and sexual violence. Additionally, disparities persist by race, ethnicity, and geography. This can be seen in poverty rates that vary by region, mental health, substance use, and sexual violence. However, lastly, we know that girls have endless potential for growth. And that concludes my preview of the Status of Girls report. And I would now like to pass it back to Devan to introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Dow. That was wonderful. There is so much very valuable information that you shared with us and even more in the report. We want to introduce our wonderful group of panelists right now here seen on this screen. If the panelists want to go ahead and turn their cameras on right now, I invite you to do that as I read your bios. First, we have Cara Cabral. Cara serves as the Program Director for Arts and Reach, AIR, where she supports the creativity and voices of youth through accessible arts and mentoring programming. In addition to her work at AIR, Cara serves on committees in her Seacoast community, including the Dover Mental Health Alliance Steering Committee, the Somersworth Youth Connection Advisory Panel, and she's a resident artist at the Dover Wrong Brain Arts Collective. Growing up as a teenager in Manchester, Cara frequented a free teen art center where she found supportive relationships and a healthy outlet in the arts, which inspired her professional trajectory. Jaihliani Ortiz, Jay, is a senior at Nashua High South. She's also the Girls Inc. 2017 Girl of the Year Award winner, where she was a program participant since she was 8 years old and is now on staff as an assistant group leader. Next, we have Dr. Maria Ramos, who's a family physician is a family physician activist with a decade of experience practicing full scope family medicine with obstetrics in both rural and urban settings. A graduate of Manchester West High School, she returned in 2016 to practice medicine in Nashua and is currently a medical director for GateHouse Treatment Center. Recently, she also co-founded the Lighthouse, New Hampshire. It's a Facebook page to help address health and wellness concerns for New Hampshire BIPOC communities. And finally, we have Kristin Smith. Dr. Kristin Smith is a family demographer and visiting research associate professor of sociology at Dartmouth College. Her research focuses on women in work and family policy, child well-being, and gender inequality. She's the co-author of the Status of Girls report and is companion The Status of Women, published in 2018. So I'm going to start with a question to Kristin, and Dow, if you want to take down this slide here so we can see our panelists' faces. I'm going to put it in gallery view so I can see everyone. So first I want to start with Kristin. Kristin's the co-author of this report. She's the previous co-author of the Status of Women report. You know this data inside and out. You know these trends well. What surprised you about the data?
Thank you so much for this introduction, and Dow, that was such a nice preview of the data. I'm sure everyone's just like wanting to go and look at the report and really dive in. I'm really thrilled to be part of the team that's been working on this report. And it's quite striking that we were able to dig up so much data on girls in our state. We really would not have been able to do this even 15 or 20 years ago. As Devan said, I am a sociologist and family demographer. who studies gender inequality, work and family, and policy. So what this means is that I look at how societies organize the power dynamics within inequality, social relationships, interactions, and everyday life. And as a demographer, I look for patterns in the data to help inform my sociological perspective. So I've spent a lot of time over the past 30 years looking at data and trying to make sense of our social world. This inaugural Status of Girls report has a lot of data. And much of it calls for celebration, as Dow remarked, but I also see some warning signs or indications of challenges. So I'm going to focus my remarks on 3 things that surprised me in the data. And some of these are remarks that Dow mentioned as well, some of the data that he mentioned. So the first thing is that girls in New Hampshire are now performing at the same level as boys in math and science per the subject proficiency scores, but not the SAT scores. So this is a great achievement and something many have been watching and pushing for. It shows an inkling of a breakdown of barriers in education as stereotypes about girls' lack of math and science abilities have received pushback. With this success in math and science in elementary and middle schools, girls will hopefully not shy away from these topics and fields as they enter high school, college, the workforce. We know that bringing more women into STEM and plugging up the leaky pipeline is one way to reduce the gender wage gap. So parity and proficiency is the first step. The second step is parity in SAT scores. The next indicator that I want to discuss is a mix of sort of good news and a warning. Let's celebrate that girls and boys are using more effective methods of contraception, such as the IUD and the pill, and that teen pregnancy rates in New Hampshire have dropped from 18 per 1,000 girls in 2007 to 2009 to 8.5 per 1,000 girls in 2016 to 18. That's a decrease of 55%. We've cut this in half. So that's excellent. But chlamydia rates, as Dow mentioned, are rising among teens, up 43% from 2014. This is likely linked to the drop in condom use over that same period of time. Chlamydia is also up among college-aged young women. So we need to be better messaging to teens to protect themselves against sexually transmitted diseases and infections. And then the third area that I want to discuss is an area of concern, depression and suicide. So I was really struck by the high levels of depression and suicidal contemplations among girls in our state. As Dow mentioned, 44% of girls reported feeling depressed, and almost 1/4 have considered suicide. So remember, this data is pre-pandemic. This is 2019 data. So I kind of shudder to think about, how this may have changed during the pandemic. Those of us who have kids, teens in our lives, we know how hard the pandemic has been on them. The most disheartening is the disparities that we see in this indicator by race and ethnicity and by geographic region. Girls of color in New Hampshire are suffering from mental health to a greater extent, as well as girls living in the Winnipesaukee, the Greater Sullivan, which is that Claremont area, and the North Country. All those 3 regions have girls, more than 50% or more of their girls reporting feelings of depression. That's half, 1 out of every 2. So girls are feeling societal expectations. We see this in the data: pressure to perform in school, expectations to lose weight. They're engaging in substance use at parity with boys. 1 in 3 of girls vape, and experiencing bullying and sexual violence. 28% experience bullying, 17% have experienced sexual violence. So we need to respond to these numbers with more support, and the right kinds of support in schools and our families, in the organizations that are highlighted in this report, in our churches, in other and other support groups that we have, this is really a wake-up call that we collectively need to answer. So in closing, this report is a celebration of girls, the positive steps already taken and the challenges ahead. The good we must celebrate, the challenges we must meet head on and work to ameliorate. I do want to note that this report presents single indicators. It's really unidimensional. Sometimes the indicators are shown by race and ethnicity or by county, but we know that girls and boys are multidimensional. We need further research to pinpoint how these indicators connect. But in the meantime, we can use this report as a roadmap for where we need to focus our attention to further improve the lives of girls in our state.
Thanks, Kristin. I like what you said about using this as a roadmap and a wake-up call. This is really important data for us to use now. With that, I want to go to Dr. Ramas and ask you, what is the data that is speaking most to your experience as a family physician with your patients, families, and communities that you're working with?
Thanks, Devan, and thanks for inviting me to this really important space. I was sharing not too long ago that having been raised in New Hampshire, I would have never dreamed 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that there would be a report talking about the conditions of girls and the disparities that they face in the state of New Hampshire. Like, that would have never even crossed my mind. So I'm so excited to be part of this movement and identifying that not only is there a niche, but this is a special population for so many reasons. And that's one of the things that I recognize within the report, Devan. You know, as a family physician, my passion is in promoting health equity. And health equity really means to me that every person has the opportunity to be their best form of themselves. And it's my life's passion to make sure that all populations that are underrepresented or historically excluded within my circles of influence have that opportunity to be the best forms of themselves. And the first thing that we can do to get there is identifying the data. So hats off to the Women's Foundation, Kristin, the team, Dow, for putting so much effort into really creating a salient way, a concrete way to identify not only what we're doing well, but the gaps. So without further ado, you know, some of the things that I recognize within the report and trends are particularly in health and wellness and mental health and well-being. I found that it was interesting that particularly for our young girls of color, that they are suffering. And often mental health is always is difficult to access for adults. It's even more difficult to access for our younger adolescent and younger patients. And so, you know, I wonder, with the remarkable differences that we saw within the report, you know, how much is being underreported? There's a level of self-reporting that needs to happen and trust. And for some populations, particularly those that are historically excluded, that level of trust and safety may not be prevalent enough to really share what their main concerns are. So the fact that there is a disparity, the fact that there is a difference, and that we can see, we can only assume that it's magnified and underreported. So I think that this would be an excellent place for us to look further into, especially as we're emerging from this new normal post-COVID or in COVID. So how can we best delegate our resources to make sure our young patients, our women and young girls, have access to quality mental health and wellness care? I'm really glad that the report highlighted bullying and cyberbullying. It has been increasingly bad, particularly with the community that I serve. You know, our kids, again, with being in isolation, have been turning more to social media, and the actual impact of social media in the formation of one's identity. I think that is just so intriguing for me right now. Like, how do our new generation now identify themselves vis-a-vis our social media? And so I'm very glad that the report was able to highlight that. One of the things that I think would be an interesting place that I'm seeing within my populations that I'm taking care of in the communities I serve, though, is this concept of emotional violence, it's emotional abuse and mental abuse. And so, you know, oftentimes in my practice, I have to remind my patients that even though you're not having physical marks on you, the effects of emotional strain and toxic dynamics within the key structures in which we live can create lasting impacts on how we identify ourselves and the relationships that we form later on. I'd be really interested to have further information that highlights that and kind of digs into emotional abuse, toxic relationships, and how do people identify that in this age of now social media, which can be a little tricky. So excited to see this advancement in educational parity between girls and boys, particularly in STEM. And so it's great to see that, you know, girls now are starting to score better on their standardized testing compared to boys. I'll just state the elephant in the room. You know, our educational system is kind of founded with the gold standard as being that of excellence in men and those who identify as male, right? So I'll just put that out there. But what is really striking to me is that girls are doing this on top of all of the other hats that they're wearing. Girls are doing it while they're maintaining households, while they're probably working jobs and taking care of not only their siblings, but other loved ones within their communities and families, and they're still achieving. So how much more would they and can they do when we're able to help alleviate some of those external factors? I like to call it the woman's tax that we have. And we see that for adult women, but this is even more striking to me that we're even seeing this in those who are younger. So it starts early on, this conditioning of social roles and norms and expectations of performance, objectification from a visual and aesthetic standpoint, and then what are the expectations from an academic standpoint, which certainly can lead to those emotional stability results perhaps as well. You know, the other thing that I think would be that I just have to take away from this is that this report is from 2019, before the COVID pandemic, and you know, they're already striking changes, striking improvements, but also striking gaps that we have. And so, you know, I can't help but think, what has the impact of COVID done and is continuing to do for our young ladies in the state, this granite state? And how can I, as a health advocate, how can I better support and be a liaison to their health and well-being, and for the families that they work with and live with? How can we be a better support to them to launch them into a new future?
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Ramas. There's so much in there, and thank you for highlighting the specific emotional experiences that your patients are experiencing and humanizing and enlivening up this data. I appreciate that. I want to talk to Cara next. Cara, obviously coming from Arts and Reach, as we can tell from her beautiful background. Cara, what are the areas or the indicators in this report where you think the engaging programming, like the programming in Arts and Reach, where can it have the biggest impact in girls' lives?
I think engaging youth programming can have the biggest impact in the areas of mental health, substance use, and safety. And that's because providing girls with a welcoming, supportive community of peers and adult mentors are protective factors. Speaking from my experience with Arts and Reach, our programs offer a community where girls and gender expansive youth feel like they belong and that they are worthy of being there. Their voice deserves to be listened to, and where they feel safe and valued, and having that space is transformative. When you create opportunities for girls to develop their voice and to feel safe and empowered to share it, you're creating a foundation really for self-confidence and self-advocacy that helps them to stand up for themselves, know when to ask for help, and feel comfortable doing so. Essential skills for working through mental health challenges and abstaining from risky behaviors. Programs at Arts and Reach and the other organizations that this report spotlights teach girls healthy coping strategies. At Arts and Reach, teens learn new art forms, which gives them a creative outlet through which they can understand themselves and their experiences and share their stories.
Thanks, Cara, and that makes a lot of sense. As we think about relating this data into real opportunities, I know that Marie, you were thinking earlier, you were talking about opportunities to collaborate. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I think that the COVID has forced us to really be creative about how we look at our resourcing and how do we best address glaring issues that have been pushed under the rug. And I think that this is an amazing opportunity for so many different groups around the state to cross-collaborate. So, Devan, I have the privilege of working on the Governor's State Health Assessment and State Health Improvement Plan Advisory Council, and particularly working with the subcommittee on community engagement. And one of the things that I am just blown away by is that although New Hampshire is very small, we have a mighty force of community-led grassroots projects that are really making a difference on a super local level. I would love to see a state for us, a landscape, so to speak, for us, where we can start cross-collaborating and sharing best practices of things that we know work. Cara, I have so much respect for what you're doing in Arts and Reach, because really what's happening is you're creating a medium of community for youth. And youth, they thrive developmentally when they feel like they're in a sense of community, even more so than their own nuclear family. And so how can we create resources and reduce barriers so that more people, more youth can get involved? I remember myself growing up in Manchester, New Hampshire. I was part of a youth theater program, after school program, that was funded completely. And I would have never had the opportunity to even consider taking part of that after school program if it wasn't subsidized for my family. And so those kind of opportunities, they change and they create an imprint of positivity that can literally change the trajectory of people's lives and outcomes. And I would love to see a place in the Granite State where we can start cross-collaborating, where our healthcare and our public health can start working with our community resources in a more bi-directional way.
That is awesome. You're giving us a lot of ideas for what we're going to do right after this hour. But first, we have to talk to Jaihliani. So, Jay, we know that when we talk about girls, we have to have girls there at the table. So that's why we're so glad that you're here with us today. As a reminder, this is a Wednesday at 10 o'clock, and this is maybe a one really great opportunity of the pandemic that Jay is able to join us from home, which is going to school and managing everything else. So thank you so much, Jay, for being here. We couldn't have a talk about girls without girls at the table. So thanks for being here. So as Dow explained earlier, the most recent data we have for many indicators in this report is from before the beginning of the pandemic. That's just the way we get the data. not available yet from last year. So tell us now, what's it like being a girl in high school during the pandemic? What are the barriers or opportunities that are particularly impacting you or your peers? Fill us in.
Okay. Well, first, thank you for having me. And one of the really big things that have impacted me and my peers is being hands-on learners. It was really difficult having to go online and do all my work through a computer when it's way easier for me to do it face-to-face with my teacher and have all those activities to do hands-on. And like having to deal with the quick change of, oh yay, I'm at school, and then having to go on a computer. It was really difficult. It was just so hard to deal with, and not being able to be social with my peers, like go on fundraiser trips or dances and just school outings in general. That was really difficult.
And I think you also mentioned earlier, the constant change, going back and forth, right? And how has that transition been?
Being able to go back to school was very great. Like I was so excited to come back to school because I would be able to excel in school how I normally would than before being on remote.
And Marie, I think Dr. Ramas had asked you when we were meeting before, asking about post-grad life. So I want to let Jay respond to how the school and your community are helping prepare you for post-grad life. And I know that Dr. Ramas, I know you want to jump in after that too.
My school, I think they've done great helping us with the getting ready for after high school and college stuff, because recently we've had meetings at my school like once or twice a week where they talk about how to get applications, how to get scholarships, and where to book like counseling if you need help with those. And it was really helpful. Like I've visited them a couple of times.
Yeah, I mean that's so it's great to hear that, Jay, because oftentimes, and something that the report highlighted was that actually the places in New Hampshire like Manchester and Nashua are actually doing well compared to other areas in the state. And oftentimes we think about poor access and in the schools and how the schools are performing. We tend to think that the more urban schools, which tend to be more diverse, have a tougher time, but that's not really what has been shown in the data. That's another reason why it's so important, I think, for us to just make sure we have objective ways to tell the story. And oftentimes, when we think about the areas of the state that maybe aren't performing well, we have a bias. We have a tendency to think that, oh, the higher populated areas, the more diverse areas, they are the ones that are having struggles. But what we're seeing is maybe a little bit of the opposite, that our more rural parts of the areas may be having a little bit more difficulty in having access and having resources. And so how do we take this information and maybe take some pause and say, how does this differ from what I am expecting to see from the data as well, which is so powerful. So thank you for sharing such a real example of how you're succeeding, and maybe that of your peers as well may not be as bad as we think in the big cities.
And Jay, someone just asked a question about grades. So what do you think in terms of your peers? Do you think that your peers have been impacted in terms of their grades, going back and forth to different types of learning?
Yeah, me and my peers, actually, we were looking back, like you can look back at your old grades, and before we started to do remote, our grades, we had high B's, high A's, like we were doing great in school. And then once we did remote, like our grades dropped because it was so much harder to catch up with learning and being able to adapt to doing it online.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like we hear about that a lot, but the way you talk about it makes it really real, that you can look back and you can see. I think earlier, Dr. Ramas had said that girls are thriving and excelling despite juggling so many balls. And I think that's really true, what you're talking about, your experience and your peers' experience of going back and forth to remote, being at home, being in school, preparing for post-grad life, and also working. And that's one thing I want to ask you about, is that we know that you are really involved in Girls Inc., another organization that we've spotlighted in the report, and that you are quoted and featured in. Could you tell us about your experience with Girls Inc., or what you do there now, or how it's helped you, or what you've learned there?
Yeah. So for starters, I've been going to Girls Inc. since I was 8, so it's almost been 10 years now, really long time. Currently, since last year, I think it's been almost a year, I am a staff and assistant leader, which is very exciting. And Girls Inc. has taught me a lot of things. And the first thing was Girls Inc. has taught me how to respect and appreciate others and how to be a very great role model, because as you know, we work with a bunch of little girls, so they're always looking up to you and you want to show them the right way to act, and many life skills that'll help me not only with my career but my independence, and of course our great motto on how to be strong, smart, and bold.
That is so awesome. Nice, strong, smart, and bold. Nice plug, Jay. That is awesome. So we are getting down to the last 5 minutes of our time here, but I also want to recognize Carrie, who put in an awesome point and question in the chat about representing data of girls with developmental disabilities. And I'm going to ask Dow if he can talk a little bit more about the data we got. What I can say so far is that we have large available data from both the census and the YRBS, which is the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is where a large portion of our data comes. And as Dow mentioned at the beginning, we're really limited to the ways in which those YRBS, Youth Risk Behavior Survey, can break down. And sometimes we struggle with the way that they ask about gender is just male, female. So that's limiting to us. The way they ask about race, ethnicity, sometimes our numbers are so small that we can't report that. And so Dow can chime in there with more information on that data and how that's broken down and what we can see. But I think it's a really important point, no matter what the YRBS provides to us, that we can look forward to in next iterations of this. So this is also why I'm so glad that we have this opportunity to talk about what people want to see in data about girls in New Hampshire. And it's a great opportunity to talk about collaborations and how we'll use this data to support girls. And so thank you for bringing this up. And this is definitely going to go on our list for how we're going to talk about this in future iterations. Dow, do you want to chime in any more with that?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Devan. And this is a really, really important piece that I want to discuss. I mentioned it briefly at the beginning of the presentation, but it's important to revisit it. So, like I said, a lot of the data comes, or repeating what Devan said, the data comes from state and national agencies. So we're limited in what we have available. And this was a big challenge for us, because there were a lot of areas that we knew, or we thought we knew would be important to include, but unfortunately just weren't available. And that includes, girls with developmental disabilities, neurodivergent girls and teens, and then also gender expansive girls and youth. But as Devan said, a lot of this data that's available isn't disaggregated by gender or sex, and certainly not by self-identified gender or sex often. So I think it's important that as we move forward, we continue to advocate at the state level for data collection methods that include these various populations that represent the diverse identities that the girls in our state hold. Because with the YRBS, these are policy decisions. Girls in other states' YRBSs include some of these questions on gender identity and developmental disabilities. So it's important that we continue to push, we make our voices heard, and we advocate that we need data that accurately represents the whole population of girls.
Thanks, Al. I know you'd know that you, oh, go ahead, Kristin.
Can I just, I just want to chime in that the advocacy piece is really important. As Dow said, these are decisions that state officials are making in terms of data collection. And so if we as a community want specific things in our data collection, then we need to make that known to those who are making those decisions. And you know, the bulk of our really great data comes from the Youth Risk Behavioral Survey, which is relatively new in New Hampshire, and they are adding questions. Some states have asked questions about identity that New Hampshire has not included those questions. But I think 17 states have piloted those questions. So if we're interested in having those included, then we need to make our voices heard.
Thanks, Kristin. That's really important, and a good place for me to shout out how wonderful our partners are at the state who get us this data and who work so hard on this data and who I know also want to see more data. So we're really grateful to them as well. And we're rounding out 11 o'clock. One other thing I wanted to mention is that Lisa asked a question about resources for girls and families and types of services. So I just wanted to note that Crystal put in the chat a list of our grantees over the years. And these are some of the awesome, most wonderful groups, including Girls Inc., including AIR, including so many of our spotlighted organizations and more. And these are a great place to learn about the work in our community on behalf of women and girls. That is not the only list, that is not the fully extensive list, but that's our grantees and who we've invested in. And we encourage you all to learn more about those amazing programs and to invest in girls as well. Dow, if you want to pull up the final slide. We have some other folks who chimed in, and we're going to get back to you about connecting and those pieces of things. But as we close out at 11 here, I want to thank our panelists for giving us such a rich discussion on this data. I want to thank Dow and Kristin and all of our data partners for making this available to us so we can move forward on this data and take action on it. And the first thing we can do is you can come to our next event, which is at noon today. It's the New Hampshire Women's Foundation Women Building Community Lunch, and it's online via Zoom. It's today at noon. And if you go to the next slide, Dow, we have some wonderful speakers there. Yes, Teresa Younger and Jennifer Lockwood-Shabat. And we hope that you can join us there. We can put in a link to register if you'd like to join us. Please continue the discussion with us, reach out and talk to us about data and how you'll use this data in the future. And thank you so much for joining us today.